Our group presentation explores the development of the question, why were University of Bristol buildings renamed after Colston but not Wills? The Learning Through Place module taught us how to undertake research through the concept of the rabbit hole. Each week we followed a new line of inquiry, such as week 2 studying forced labour. From the weekly tasks, data sources and research questions, we discovered a variety of information that sparked our interest, leading us to ask questions and explore more online, deepening into our rabbit holes. This module is rooted in the concept of place. Place has historically been difficult to define, however, the Dictionary of Human Geography defines it as a geographical local of any size or configuration. Bristol gets much of its place identity from its key role in the transatlantic slave trade, so we focused on this. The legacies of some merchants who profited on and owned these ships remains in Bristol today. One example of this is Edward Colston. We furthered our knowledge about attitudes towards Edward Colston today by watching Ian Cook's video about the Black Lives Matter movement in 2020, which then led us to finding more out about Colston and how he is commemorated within Bristol, affecting its place identity.
As prompted by the WordPress, we explored Edward Colston and who he was. He was an English merchant, philanthropist and politician from Bristol who is best known for his involvement in the Atlantic slave trade, as well as becoming a prominent figure in Bristol. Colston was associated with the Royal African Company, which was a company heavily involved in the slave trade and the transportation of enslaved Africans to the Americas and Caribbean. Colston made significant contributions to various charitable causes in Bristol, and his philanthropy left a lasting impact on the city. However, his wealth and success were built on the exploitation of enslaved individuals. In recent times, there has been a re-evaluation of his legacy due to his connection to the slave trade. The legacy of Edward Colston became a subject of public debate and controversy. In June 2020, during protests in response to the killing of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement, a statue of Colston in Bristol was toppled by protesters and thrown into the harbour. This event sparked discussions about the commemoration of individuals with ties to the slave trade and the broader issues of historical monuments and their significance in the present day. This led us to investigate certain monuments and places in Bristol named after Colston, such as Colston Street and Colston Tower, as well as a university accommodation originally named after him, but then later changed, further leading us to inquire why certain places had their names changed and some did not.
The concept of place and the meaning behind different places is important to understand. Colston Street, place is defined as a point on Earth's surface of individual identity and a scale of everyday life. It considers place as a location, the sense of place, and place as a locale to allow further understanding of a specific area. As we walked along Colston Street, many things stood out to us that gave this road a specific identity. One thing we noticed is that Colston Street has no road signs, showing a significant loss of Edward Colston's presence in Bristol, and therefore a change to this sense of place. Geography is based around place, therefore a change to the sense of place will significantly alter the geographical meaning to it.
In order to gain our own experience of the atmosphere of commemoration of Edward Colston, we visited places named after him on our field class to Bristol. We began walking along Colston Street. There was noticeable evidence of the Black Lives Matter movement as we were unable to find a street name sign saying Colston Street. Moreover, upon our urban wonder of this area, we found many places had been renamed. For example, we found a sign pointing to Colston Hall, but in fact this had since been renamed the Bristol Beacon. When we found the building itself, it had been completely rebranded by its new name. On Colston Street, we were particularly interested to find the University of Bristol's accommodation called number 33. From prior research, we know that this used to be called Colston Street Accommodation. The sign to this accommodation still clearly had the old name present, as it was embossed into the plaque with the new name painted over.
We used the Know Your Place online tool to compare this area, which was rich with Colston commemoration, on the right in 2019 and on the left from 1844 to 1888. This different data type highlighted to us the sense of changelessness in the layout of these streets, with both Colston Street and Colston Avenue being situated on what historically was tramways. Although the physical buildings have changed, the built environment of the place has remained in a similar location, echoing that although number 33 University Accommodation has been renamed, there is still evidence of its historical link to the transatlantic slave trade present today. Prompted by... Prompted by the recommended academic reading, we read Mike Krang's 1996 essay, Envisioning Urban Histories, Bristol as a Palimpsest, Postcards and Snapshots. In this essay, the concept of a palimpsest refers to cities being layered with multiple historical periods, each leaving different marks on the urban landscape. Krang uses the example of Bristol to explore how these layers of history interact and influence the present-day urban environment. He notes that describing it as a palimpsest produces a landscape on which history inscribes itself as a process of addition, amendment, and perpetual alteration. Hence, it seems that the sign for number 33 accommodation perfectly illustrates Krang's understanding of Bristol as a palimpsest. His essay continues to discuss how acknowledging and preserving the diverse historical strata of a city, communities can then foster a sense of connection to their heritage to better navigate current challenges. This is particularly interesting in relation to the University of Bristol's decision to rename Colston Street accommodation. Hence, we became increasingly intrigued as to who came to this decision and why they reached this conclusion.
After being particularly fascinated by the University of Bristol's decision to rename accommodation after Edward Colston, we began to look at their other buildings named after people and were shocked to discover many of these other names were also interlinked with the transatlantic slave trade. We focused on the university's Wills Memorial Building, as its tower makes it an iconic landmark of the university. From looking on the university's website, we found out that the Wills Memorial Building houses the university's School of Law and the School of Earth Sciences, as well as hosting graduation ceremonies twice a year and a variety of public events. The building itself was named after Henry Overton Wills III. As prompted by the research we did on Wills Memorial Tower, we wanted to discover more about the man it is dedicated to. We did this by using his obituaries, such as the one from the Times newspaper. Henry Overton Wills III was the son of the founder of the company W.D. and H.O. Wills Tobacco Manufacture, which benefited heavily from the tobacco that came from the slave plantations in the Caribbean. Wills was involved in this company from 1846 until 1880, when he left the business, but later became the first Chancellor of the University of Bristol. After his death in 1911, his sons arranged for a memorial to be built in his name, which is the Wills Memorial Building on Queen's Road, which cost just over £500,000. The Wills family ended up donating about £25 million to Bristol University, which makes up a large majority of the university's initial funding.
This diagram concludes our rabbit hole journey, showing the stages that drew us to our final question. Through defining place and familiarising ourselves with Bristol's place identity, we discovered Bristol's relevance in the transatlantic slave trade. As for the different lines of inquiry throughout the module, we were particularly interested by Week 2, learning about Bristol through a lens about its past of forced labour, as well as studying the removal of Edward Colston's statue as a part of the Black Lives Matter movement in 2020, further interesting us in his personal connection to the slave trade and Bristol as a place. This led us to discover many commemorations of him within Bristol, including University of Bristol accommodation on Colston Street, which has recently been renamed Number 33 accommodation. We went to visit this on our field class and found remnants of his old name in the built environment, giving us a sense of place and helping us understand how his legacy is presented to the public even after the Black Lives Matter movement. Krang's article further prompted us to understand place as a palimpsest, where layers of history are evident in the urban environment, such as on Colston Street. From looking at more buildings that are a part of the University of Bristol, we became interested in the Wills Memorial Building, which was named after Henry Overton Wills III. It's interesting that, like Colston, much of his wealth came from the transatlantic slave trade. However, this building has not been renamed and is still heavily associated with his family. There is still plenty of depth to our rabbit hole, but our line of inquiry brought us to our overall research question: why were University of Bristol buildings renamed after Colston but not Wills?